Another point that wasn't brought up in the video was America's greatness at the expense of others. While certain parts of the population were experiencing a great life, other people were not. Um, During the 1950s and the 1980s, America was at the peak of greatness. And while white Americans were experiencing best conditions in the world, there were other people in the population that were not experiencing that. During the 1950s, segregation of African Americans, women, Native Americans, and anybody immigrating to the United States was at the expense of white Americans. Now, even today, Hispanic population is the next group that is taking expense at the greatness of America. Anybody who wants to talk?
Tom, you mentioned that during the 1950s there were other people who were being discriminated against. Well, what about the 1920s? That was during the roaring 20s when America was in an economic boom. Did you also know that was during the time when we were introduced to jazz music, which originated from the South, which was one of the biggest musics of the African American culture. Also, during the 1920s was the year of the flapper, or when women were starting to get the right to vote. So, other than that, I think America has had some good opportunities, but not at all, like you said.
With adding on to Tom's point, during the 50s and 60s, there were varying aspects that, like, throughout the World War II, the African American was mostly like a degrading position in the Army or Navy or Air Force, like a mechanic or a cook. And then by the time the Vietnam and Korean Wars came up, the commander of the platoon would be like almost a white supremacist and would leave his soldiers in his group to die in many cases, which is very heartbreaking at the same time.
It sucks that the people are so blind to what is actually going on. How in my entry statement I mentioned how the 50s were great, and I didn't even think about the segregation between whites and blacks, and that is just so wrong, and it's so messed up, and that is what America does. They section out groups of people that they don't want people to like, and people respond to it. They go along with it, just like how, this is later on and earlier, but how Native Americans were just sent to these desert places to live where there was no water, there's no food, and they are just forced in this small location and really, really bad living conditions. There's a really, really big reservation in New Mexico, and the living conditions there are terrible. It's like there's just a bunch of shacks. I got a little off topic with time-wise, but people just, I don't know, people are blind to what's really going on. They love their ideals.
With the segregation of citizens within the United States, there has been a huge problem in America and throughout our history. But while we are shopping at Walmart or taking advantage of the freedom or the freedom and consumerism that we have in the United States, there are people overseas that are being taken advantage of. There's always somebody that is being taken advantage of, or we are experiencing greatness over somebody else's expense. And life is not meant to be that way. It's not meant to be taking advantage of somebody else to have a greater life for yourself.
Well, I guess the term can be said, ignorance is bliss. Like you said, Tom, some people are taking advantage of what they have over others, what they don't have. However, I believe in humanity and their capabilities. I believe they can adapt. I believe they can get along with each other, but it may take time before we can actually realize this.
I seriously think that I've travelled quite extensively, and the most opinionated racist people I've ever met all live here in America. They're all so opinionated, they won't let anyone else have a say in their lives. And you go overseas and you meet people like, oh, you're not from here, I'm going to be friends with you. And going along with the ignorance is bliss idea. And ignorance really is bliss here. Most people, they don't realise how much America is taking advantage of the fact that all these resources are to their capability. There are other locations that don't have near amount of this. But if you think about that, really, a whole discussion is on the greatness of America, really. You've got to define greatness. We do have some great aspects. We have great consumerism. We have great access. We have great excess of goods. Those aren't good things, but they are things America is great in. Going along with the racist thing, I myself, when I walk into public, I either 9 out of the 10 times I walk around, people are always like, oh, you're English. Right, where were you born in England? Where have you lived in England? All this. You know England's idiot. We rebelled against England. We won. We beat you. Every single time it happens. Only 1 out of 10 people look at me like, you're English. It's great. And they actually genuinely want to hear about my experiences in England.
So more or less, we're not necessarily, it's not even the color of your skin, it's like, doesn't even vary. Americans are biased to any degree, like color of your skin, changing your voice, mental conditions, sexual orientations, where you're from, where you've been, how old you are, whether that be in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, or 2000s. That's just consistency is one thing Americans are pretty great at, and consistency in some degrees suck, and it brings you down further.
I would like to ask a question. Is America as racist as it is now, as it was back then, say in the early 1800s, or would you say we've toned it down a bit?
Depends on the person. I work at an assisted living home, and a lot of that generation, they will call the women's, excuse my language, but they will call them whores, they will call them maids, they will call them, if they're Spanish, they won't even talk to them. They are that crazy about it. Like some people, when they're stuck with their mindset, they don't change. A lot of the new generations aren't racist against certain people, but with some people, they'll be racist against Mexicans because of all the illegal immigration, or they'll just group people together and have no idea about those people whatsoever, and they will make their judgment. And so, I mean, we don't enslave people necessarily anymore, but there's still so much judgment all the time. All the time.
I would actually say that, yes, we are as racist now as we were back then, only not in the same way. The whole enslavement idea, we do enslave people, only in a different way. Women are not paid near as much. I would say, in my opinion, that is a form of enslavement. We take our jobs and we turn them overseas because it's cheaper. I say we lightly because I don't want to really affiliate with America. I claim my nationality in England right now. But altogether, yes, we are as racist, only in a different way. The younger generation has found a way of finding that, taking that racism and twisting it in such a way that it doesn't seem like it, but when you look at it, it really is.
And even then, it's like, quite often, like, for instance, we have problems with people that smoke marijuana, yet Colorado and Washington are more commonly in the news because we were the first to actually fully legalize it. And then there's very few states that legalize gay marriages or same-sex marriages. It's like there's always gonna be one thing that maybe it's jealousy that drives the rational thinking of racism, or just not having the open feed for diversity as a whole. And that's one thing that people are lacking on. And another thing about the imprisonment, the video with Jeff Daniels, he brought up that we have the most people that are incarcerated out of the entire world. And basically, incarceration by definition is you are a slave of the state that you are in. And whether that be you're in your cell the entire time you're there, you just don't know.
Well, America's obsession with money and materialism has led to a nation that is filled with people that are only thinking for themselves, and they don't think outside the box, and they can't properly think. The fact that we have private prisons, that people are making money off of the fact that other people are going to prison, is something that is absolutely wrong. It's not just. It defeats the entire purpose of putting somebody in prison. Having a high incarceration amount of people who smoke marijuana is a enslaved society. That is not a free system. It is not free to put somebody into prison that tries to think for themselves or tries to expand their mind.
So, would you say the younger generation is learning the rage and resentment from the older generation, or is there some other indirect source they're getting it from? For me, I think the younger generation is learning from the older generation, because if you look down to it, if you look at our grandparents, they were born around that time when racial discrimination was at its very high. And when they had children, they got it from them, and so on and so on.
I think the discrimination has formed its way into something quite different now. Now there's the jokes that go around that redheads don't have souls. That's a form of discrimination. There's another thing that fat people, they are not as welcome as most other people. Skinny is the new good. And if you walk in and you're fat, people instantly are looking at you, and you're like, they're judging you. You know they are. And that is a form of discrimination. It's the same way as racism. It's taken its way and it's formed itself into something new. It still exists. It's not been terminated yet. It just looks different.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the point that you just made. But also I agree with you, Kyle. Just because you repeat what you hear, that's always how it is when you're a child and you hear your parent cuss. You're going to be saying that word for the next 2 weeks, so people hear things from the news. They hear about just certain groups of people doing certain things, or they just create their own opinion from some just biased judgment that